Welcome everyone to this webinar about stories of women in STEM and the oral history toolkit. We are going to hear about this toolkit, which you can find on INWES webpage, and you can have a look at it if you haven't already. And well, we hope it will be very useful for everyone. We are going to, first of all, a warning, the meeting is being recorded and it's being live streamed at the INWES Global YouTube channel. If you have any questions, please use the chat for that. And please keep your microphone and video off when you're not speaking, so people with low bandwidth has no issues. First of all, this is a program for today's webinar. We've got an introduction by Dr. Sarah Pierce on behalf of INWES. Then Professor Graeme Gooday and Dr. Emily Rees from Leeds University will talk about the toolkit. And then some of the people that have already tested the kit will give us their experiences. So without further ado, I'm going to play the message from Dr. Sarah Pierce, who is not able to be here today, but has sent us her presentation.
Hello, welcome to this webinar about oral histories at INWES. I'm Sarah Pierce. Very sadly for me, I'm not able to join you at the webinar itself, and hence this recording. I'm introducing this not because I have a special role in the project or in the program, but because I know a little bit about the history of it, but there are many people at INWES that are making sure that we have recordings of our stories. For those of you who don't know at INWES, we're an international network of networks. Most of our members are organizations of women in STEM, i.e. science, technology, engineering, mathematics. And we are very closely linked to the United Nations, particularly we're NGO partner to UNESCO and to ECOSOC. We have observer status with the UNFCCC, that's the climate change group, and we do lots of collaboration with the Commission for the Status of Women. We represent probably over 50 countries worldwide and probably over 250,000 women. Our mission is very simple. We want to build a better future for the world through the full and effective participation of women and girls in all aspects of STEM. What's obviously very relevant to the oral history program is the history of INWES itself. INWES was established officially in 2002, however, and that was with the support of the United Nations and UNESCO in particular. However, its history starts way before then. The very first international conference for women engineers and scientists was held in 1964. This was a hugely important conference because it brought together women from across the world to discuss the issues of gender and STEM. Since then, there have been 18 conferences, and they've been held in various different countries reaching all around the world. Our next conference, the 19th ICWES, will be held in September in New Zealand, and hopefully we'll see some of you there. So now on to the background to the INWES Oral Histories project, because this project has a little bit of a history of its own. Over the last term of the last board of directors, i.e. in 2020, Professor Gooday from the history department at Leeds University approached the board and had many discussions with Gail Matson, the then president, on the possibility of accessing the archives and records of INWES, particularly the INWES history all the way back to 1964. The idea was to extend a project that Professor Gooday had been working on called Electrifying Women, which had focused on the history of women in engineering in the United Kingdom. But this time, of course, the idea was to extend that and to look at all areas of STEM across the whole world. Gail Matson and several other people, myself included, very much agreed with this idea, very much approved of this, and we wanted to support this in any which way we could. Graeme, Dr. Elizabeth Bruton and Dr. Emily Rees held a workshop, a wonderful workshop at INWES 18 in 2021. And that workshop was to introduce the whole idea of oral histories to INWES members, and in particular to seek their help to make the online, an online repository of female participation in engineering and science much more inclusive. Proposals were submitted by INWES and Leeds University and the team at Leeds University to a research council here in the United Kingdom, the Arts and Humanities Research Council, and to a Canadian Research Council as well in 2021. The main idea there was we were seeking quite a lot of funding to both support INWES activity and the team at Leeds University, but also to consider creating materials that were translated to various different languages so that we really could get out to beyond just the English-speaking world, and in particular making use of the regional networks at INWES. Unfortunately, we weren't successful with those proposals. They were very large proposals and very hard to access funding organisations. However, as a pilot study, the team at Leeds did create a website with interviews by students at the history department at Leeds of 3 amazing women of INWES. We tried again with a slightly smaller proposal with another research council and with also seeking support from partners of INWES. We were seeking £10,000 to support the funding for workshops and also part-time assistants at Leeds University and translations to French as a minimum to be able to reach big parts of Africa. Although this was unsuccessful, the panel of the Research Council were hugely positive about the proposal. So that has made us feel that we should continue with this work in one way or another. So today, what is happening? What's happening now? Well, we have decided to continue the collaboration, at least on a volunteer basis. INWES is very clear that the whole idea of oral histories is very important. We know of stories that have started to get lost. We know stories that could so easily be lost. We would like to make recordings of past stories and current stories so that in the future we don't lose the information about women who've done amazing things and ordinary women who've worked in STEM too. We have been seeking volunteers for stories, for testing out some of the ideas, and very slowly working towards a long-term strategy on a safe repository for the stories themselves and any data and archives and files that we manage to gather on the way. The team at Leeds University, thank you so much to Graeme Gooday and to Emily Rees for continuing to work with this. Graeme has been working with some of his students to carry out a few more interviews, and Emily and Graeme together have been working on an oral history toolkit. Today, we're sharing that draft toolkit. At INWES 19 in New Zealand, we will be running a workshop on oral histories and how to use the toolkit. This is a toolkit for all INWES, for all members at INWES, but also beyond. We hope to be able to share this well beyond INWES and gather as many stories as we can of hidden figures in STEM. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoy the rest of the webinar and I hope to meet you all soon. Thank you.
I'm sorry, that was Sarah's introduction. And if, in case anyone is curious, Graeme has posted on the chat the link to the toolkit. It's a draft of the toolkit, and you can download it from INWES page from the link Graeme posted. And now Graeme Gooday, Professor Graeme Gooday and Dr. Emily Rees are going to speak about the toolkit and explain what's the toolkit itself. So.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Belen, and thank you all for joining us today to learn more about the toolkit. I think Sarah gave a pretty comprehensive overview there of some of the background to how we arrived here, and we would encourage you all during this talk, if you want to go on to the link and actually just have a look at the toolkit as we're talking. So as Sarah said, we've been working with INWES since around 2020 to build this, and have sort of been piloting different approaches, including working with University of Leeds students. And what we want to really get across in the toolkit is that this really is for everyone, and also that it doesn't require any kind of background in oral history or an understanding of ethics or the processes. The toolkit is designed to take you from the very beginning of the process right through to the end. And so why we're running things like these early introductory webinars is that we really want you to read it and look at the draft and tell us what you think needs to be improved to make it clearer. Because the idea is that there shouldn't be any questions, too many questions that arise, that it should be as clear as possible. So we really want to have your input, and that's part of why we're here today. I think just one thing before I hand over to Graeme is just to say that we feel like our conversations with INWES have shown that it's really important to share women's stories, because the presumption about engineers and scientists is that it's a male figure, often a white male figure. So part of what this work is trying to do is create these oral histories to share and for them to act as role models. So really that we can realise that there isn't one model of what an engineer or a scientist looks like. And just for girls and women who are thinking about joining the STEM fields, that they realise that there's lots of precedents and lots of inspirational stories that might make them feel like it won't be such a lonely road ahead, and that there is this really big community that they can be part of. But yeah, so I'll just hand over to Graeme now.
Well, thanks very much indeed, Emily, and thanks indeed to Belen and Jungsun for hosting this meeting. It's been a joy to work with INWES. What I want to emphasise, following up what Emily's helpfully said, is that we wanted to focus on oral history as the best means of helping people tell stories of their lives who wouldn't naturally feel either the opportunity or the skills, or maybe even the self-confidence to just write it as an autobiography. It really feels, from what we found, is that interviewing, having a conversation really brings out stories in a more relaxed way. And with the technology of Zoom and Teams, it's now a lot easier to get a transcription of the recording. If any of you knew about oral history in the old days, it required having a tape recorder and having to transcribe it manually. Now at least we can get something like a transcript easily ready. So Zoom has helped us. Now what we had to do, as you heard from Sarah, was to work with some students who were extremely enthusiastic about the idea of interviewing women around the world who are engaged in STEM. Fortunately, there is a module at the University of Leeds for liberal arts students, which gives students credit for working with the researcher on their projects. The students who worked on this with me in the last 2 years did very well, got very high marks for what they've done, and I hope you see that in the quality of the toolkit they've helped us produce. And they set up interviews, and you'll hear from Jungsun how she experienced it. And it was really quite an exciting but complicated thing to do. It was very obvious from the start that we had to think very hard about the ethics of all of this. The University of Leeds allowed our students to talk to INWES members only once we'd been very clear that INWES members had been told what the interview questions would be, what it would be like to have to write their stories down, how they might need indeed to change what they said as a result of being recorded. So many memories come back, maybe unexpected. But we worked on this hard together, and hopefully those who have been interviewed will agree that the results of the interviews was a positive experience of sharing from woman to woman. It was very interesting that we had so many very bright young women wanting to do the interviewing work. And the premise has been basically, we think that if undergraduates at the University of Leeds in their second year can do interviewing work, then we think that any sensible, qualified professional, anyone with any commitment can actually also learn to do oral histories. It's meant to be very inclusive. It's not just professional historians that can do this sort of work. Anyone, we think, in INWES can, we hope, with the aid of this toolkit, do oral history work. The thing that we actually perhaps want to emphasize is that there's a lot of work involved. There's a lot of discussion in advance about how to set up the meeting. There's a great deal to be done in thinking about when it'll be as most convenient. The time zones are really quite challenging sometimes. We also found that language issues can come up, and it's evident that most people would really prefer to be interviewed in their own first language. It's much harder to talk about your past, it seems, in a second language. What we hope to do, therefore, is make it possible for this toolkit draft we have to be translated into other languages so people can use it in their own way. But the point is not to assume that English is the central language of any of this. That's not what we want to assume. It's just our starting point and everything. And what we produced in the toolkit basically is a step-by-step guide to how you go about it all, actually indicating first what is needed. You've heard from Sarah and from Emily why we have to do this, what to do in the interview, how to think about the ethics carefully in terms of getting the informed consent, getting particularly written confirmation that your interviewee has agreed to talk about their life and answer particular questions, and also to agree how later the data will be stored and where and how it might be published, and also the clear point that the interviewee can at any stage withdraw their text, any part of it. There are some further developments we need to think about the equipment that you'd use, but we've actually given you all the questions to think about, some examples of how you might want to address someone's life. There are other versions of those questions that you can use if you wish to do so. There's also some discussion of the transcription. It's very clear that when you look at how Teams and Zoom operate, they generate imperfect transcription. So we recommended using Otter, which is used by many people now actually to generate a much more accurate transcription, and it can adapt to language of the speaker as it goes. There's also some advice about how to share your oral history, who with. Some of our students did some podcasting based on Jung-Sung Kim's excellent interview. And what you have also in the toolkit is indeed very kindly, Jung-Sung Kim has agreed to have her interview as an example of what it might look like with one of our students, Maeve Gallagher. So that's as far as we've got. We've put in addition at the end some frequently asked questions. So at this point, Emily, you want to talk about some of those?
Well, I think what I wanted to emphasize as well is that the model with the students that worked well was the interviews, but we've also included in the toolkit a mode of self-interviewing, just in case you could, in fact, interview someone else and also choose to interview yourself. But we've kind of given both of those options because we know as well that according to different cultural differences, some people might not want to do an interview of them, recording of their own history, but would feel very comfortable being interviewed by someone else. But also on the other side of things, that someone might just feel that they felt more comfortable maybe writing down their testimony and sharing it in that way. So we've tried to kind of offer flexible approaches. And again, we would welcome feedback on that if you feel perhaps that there's an approach that you would like to take that you feel is perhaps missing in it. So we don't, I've just seen that there was a question about the transcription tools. So the one that's written down is called Otter, so OTTER, but also there are transcriptions now that are part of, if you were, say, using an online meeting tools such as Zoom, like we're on today, and Teams, they have them embedded. So there are lots of different ways to do it. But Otter was something that we were recommended by someone who works professionally in oral histories. So we kind of assumed that one was probably going to be pretty good. I think the other thing as well is, obviously, as Graeme has emphasised, the ethics are really important, thinking about how it's stored. But we are having a lot of those conversations with INWES, so that in the final version of the toolkit, that should hopefully be, there'll be a consent form for you to use. So all of those guidelines should be quite clear. So what we don't want is that sort of language to put people off thinking that this is something that they can do. And most of all, I think what I want to emphasize is that this should be fun and enjoyable. And you're going to hear now from some of the people who actually went through this process. But ultimately, this should feel like quite a rewarding and joyful experience, albeit one that's going to throw up some challenges, reflecting on perhaps parts of your professional career that weren't always enjoyable. But ultimately, this is about celebrating the contributions of women to STEM and kind of women to women conversations about that. So that's, I think, what I feel like I would like to end on is just this idea that the toolkit is meant to make this as easy as possible, so that all of you go away hopefully excited and thinking about this as a really great opportunity. But in this drafting process, we would love to hear back from you, to hear on those bits that we can do to make this feel as smooth and easy a process as possible, so that hopefully loads of these oral histories start coming in and INWES can start storing and sharing them. Graeme, I don't know if you have any further thoughts, but I think our time is nearly up.
Yeah, well, would it be helpful for me to actually screen share the toolkit, do you think, Belen?
Yes, I think it would be very nice. So even if people have downloaded, to follow the toolkit with you, it will be more interesting, I think. Yes.
Yeah, is it visible now?
Yes.
I'll just scanning through quickly. Feel free to speak as I do this, Belen. I'm just showing people what the sections look like.
Maybe it's not the moment because I wanted to ask the questions at the end, but Sylvia Kegel has asked, which transcript tools do you presently use?
We answered that just now with reference to...
Oh, yes. Yes, I just saw it, sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Gail Matheson asked, will you be discussing future efforts for funding allocations for the final products?
Not necessarily today, I don't think. That's we're just thinking about the toolkit, but we are happy sort of off this call or to think through other funding avenues. I think that's right, Graeme. I sort of haven't got anything sort of immediately to talk about on that.
Yes, I suppose one thing I would say is that we want this toolkit to be available without any further finance being required. I think the most sustainable way of maintaining oral history, for it to be normalized so that everyone does it as part of their routine working lives, perhaps. It'd be nice to have a publication from this, but these days it is so much easier to have things published online that I think what we were hoping for, and this may be something for Jung-Sun to comment on, is that INWES will itself make these oral histories available in some appropriate way, for example, by its website, so that there will not be a need for finance. We want to have no financial barriers to all the stories we've helped collect to be available to everyone, so that everyone can see how many women have been excellent scientists and engineers for many decades.
Very good. Have you found the part of the text you wanted to share?
This, I think you can see transcription and editing.
Yes.
And it says there about experts recommend using the software Otter. So that makes sense, okay?
Yes.
So that, and that can be embedded in both Zoom and Teams. There's a great way of producing a script, although be prepared to spend even then some time editing.
Yes, I mean, transcript tools are not perfect. We can see it easily on YouTube, so yeah.
Well, a lot of ums and ahs, and actually also people sometimes find in the emotion of the moment, and I wonder if Jung-Sun might want to comment on this, in the emotion of the moment, you might hesitate and start a sentence again. In the final version, you might want that to be edited so it's a little smoother, but that's normal, I think, for oral histories. They can be very intense experiences with a lot of things coming back that may not have been talked about for a long time. So it's as well to remember, it's not just editing the transcript, but actually editing for what is the most authentic voice of the person being interviewed. Yes,
that's very interesting because what there is behind the words and the gestures and the feeling is sometimes has to be difficult to portray, I guess.
Well, just to add to that, it strikes me, having been educated in the sciences myself, that it's very common in the sciences not to use the first person I, to talk only in the third person. And I think that makes it harder for people who've been in STEM to frame a sentence when they're talking about themselves. It is easier for us in the humanities because we use that language a lot. But it's a different way of thinking about how you do your job, actually, that you can come to the foreground and talk about what you do. And for many, that has been quite a startling experience, I think, but ultimately very rewarding if taken some time to get used to.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I'll stop the share now.
Okay.
Are there any other comments that Emily wants?
So Sylvia's asking is if there's also translations that we can make available because they're not already on the website, but are there some translations we can upload, or are they too drafty, I guess?
Well, translations of the toolkit or of the interviews?
The toolkit.
Well, no, when it produces first version, we don't want to produce translations until it's actually been improved and made in a form that people think appropriate. It's basically up to anybody in this webinar or elsewhere, if they want to translate it however means they wish to, like, for example, using Google Translate, that's fine. We don't want to claim ownership of this document in any absolute way. So we look forward to it being made available in all languages possible, but I guess we'll need your help to do that.
Are there some, because I know social science, I don't know much about social science, but I know a bit. And I know that sometimes can be tricky, the question part. So is there, there should be some kind of, I don't know, review of the questions, of the translated questions, so they don't diverge from the original meaning?
Well, the questions, would you say, Emily, are just suggestions that we've put forward? Many others are possible, would you say, Emily?
Yeah, definitely. We don't mean to be too prescriptive. We've given example questions of what you might want to ask, but of course, you know, you might find going through that you wanted to ask, and especially if you knew you were interviewing someone specific who had, you know, specific parts of their career that you felt you wanted to talk about. But I think I get your point, Belen, about sort of just making sure that some of the nuances haven't been mistranslated. And in a lot of our earlier conversations, we've talked to people, parts of the INWES team, and had offers of people saying, well, I could certainly proofread the version in this language. So, you know, it might be a case of sort of a bit like the transcription. You use a software to just do the main bulk of the work, and then you get a native speaker or a fluent speaker to go through and just check that it's, you know, nothing has been mistranslated in a way that we wouldn't want. So, and I think obviously what's so wonderful about working with something like INWES, which is such an international organization with so many people speaking so many different languages, is we really want to use that opportunity to kind of, you know, use the community to hopefully help us with that process, because the last thing we'd want is just to feel like there was only English versions of it, because that's not a very transnational approach to things, and it just kind of, you know, that's not the result that we or INWES want. So yes, certainly if people want to help us with that process or be involved, that's the other type of thing that could be really useful.
Don Bonfield asked, sometimes you don't have chance to conduct a full oral history, but meet people who you feel have a story to tell. Are there any guidelines or advice about how to collect sound bites or answers to specific questions that can be asked easily at a one-off meeting?
Oh, that's a really interesting. That's a really interesting question. I suppose we haven't really thought about it in that way, because we've been so sort of focused on the oral histories and collecting them in this more formal way. And God, there must be so many examples of these kind of slightly more informal conversations that you have. I suppose it would be worth collecting and thinking about those people and wondering if they would be the type of people who might want to tell, you know, be interviewed or indeed write down their own. But yes, currently I would say we don't have an answer to that. Graeme, I don't know if you want to add something.
Well, I suppose ultimately what we'd like would be, Emily, to have this toolkit available to download on the INWES website, or indeed in other versions elsewhere, that people can be invited to record their history by this means, and INWES or other platforms offer somewhere to actually have these records. I think what I would say is, Dawn, I mean, it's unwise to just leap into immediate recording unless someone gives you permission. I think the ethics of interviews, it really means, I think it's better to have a second meeting if at all possible. If someone is willing to do it, they will come back. But I suppose all we can do is just encourage people to feel that they should all find ways of helping each other share their stories, actually, by using this toolkit. And maybe we will find a way in future of having the TikTok version of this. But I think we want to be fairly formal at first, anyway. Shall we? Do we not?
Yeah, definitely.
Gail Matheson asked, how did you identify who to interview? Are you looking for more names? Where will the interviews post?
Sorry,
there are lots of questions. Yeah, it's on the chat. Yeah.
Yeah. Charity says she's going to leave very soon. Can she talk about her experience? If it's not too late.
Gail, are you still? Yes, she's here.
This is a Charity S&M. Can Charity be given a microphone to speak?
Gail, can you unmute yourself? Oh, Charity is unmuted. Yes.
Yes, I'm unmuted.
Yeah.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Hi.
It's good to be here.
Did you want to talk?
Yes, I said I had a lecture in some few minutes, so I would plead to be given the platform to share my experience during the interview, the oral history interview. So, what exactly do you want us to talk about?
Well, what did you want to say? You wanted to talk about your experience.
Yes, that was the email sent to us. You asked us to, if we would be prepared to share our experience during the interview. So what exactly do you want me to talk about? What aspect of the interview do you actually want me to talk about?
I suppose it would be interesting to hear about, I suppose, when you were asked to be interviewed, how did you feel about that? Did you have any, I suppose, worries about what that would look like? Were you hesitant, or did you think, oh yeah, I'd love to tell my story?
Yes, I wasn't hesitant at all, because I felt it was a platform to encourage someone out there. Someone could hear your story, how you've been able to pull through all the obstacles to get this far, and that would be a kind of motivation to someone. So I was really excited to have my story heard, to share my story of what has been the process, what has been the obstacle, how I overcame the obstacle, and to have gotten to this level. So for me, it was really an opportunity to help someone out there. So I was really excited to partake in the oral interview.
And did you feel like you knew going into the interview what to expect? Did you sort of feel like you had all of the questions in advance and the setup? You know, were there any surprises while you were going through the interview, for example? Or did we?
There wasn't any surprise anyway. Prior to the interview, we were informed. We were actually sent a mail to inform us on what to expect during the interview, and I think it was very in a very relaxed atmosphere. You were not compelled to say anything. It was really exciting, and I think it was very professional. So there wasn't any surprise at all, and you are free to talk about what you want to say. And the questions were even asked very politely. And for me, I think it was a very great experience.
Oh, good. Well, I'm really glad to hear that it was such a positive experience. I suppose, did you find that anything came up that you thought, oh, wow, I haven't thought about that for so long? Or I suppose after the interview, did you reflect differently on some of your experiences having done the interview?
Was it after the interview or during the interview?
Well, I suppose a little bit of both. I mean, maybe one, during the interview, did you find that you were talking about something that you hadn't expected to talk about? And I suppose then afterwards, I know sometimes it takes us a long time, doesn't it, to process something like talking about our experience, and we have these thoughts that follow up afterwards, and we think, oh yeah, that didn't occur to me at the time.
Yes, there was actually some leading questions. Sometimes you haven't even thought of saying something, but there were questions that led to other explanation, giving you the opportunity to actually delve deeper into what you had wanted to say. It was exciting because I can remember something that came up when I said, oh, in our part of the world here, it is not actually very easy managing family, managing children, and such a profession, most especially science. So she asked, how many kids do you have? Are you comfortable telling us about that? I said, no, I don't have any problem, because I'm actually a role model for my kids. So it's something very, I'm really proud to talk about marriage, kids, profession, science. So I didn't actually wanted to, it wasn't premeditated to talk about that, but there were leading questions that actually made me to delve into that. And it wasn't compelling at all. I rather find it very nice talking about that.
So what would you, if someone was maybe worried about whether wanting to either lead an interview or be interviewed, what would your advice be to your fellow or other INWES members or women in STEM about the process of either doing an interview or being interviewed? What would your words be to them?
There is absolutely nothing to worry about if you are asked to be interviewed, because personally, I think it's rather an opportunity to express yourself. It's rather an opportunity to encourage someone there. It's an opportunity to even get motivated. So personally, I would encourage everyone to partake in this interview, because it's actually going to help someone out there. Yeah.
Oh, great. Well, I know you've got to be off somewhere else. But did you feel like you had anything else you wanted to add to talking about the experience? It feels like it was something just generally very positive for you. So it's really wonderful to have that experience shared here, and hopefully it's inspiring other people to get involved.
Can you come again?
Sorry, I was just wondering if you had anything else that you wanted to share, and just because I know you've got somewhere else to be, so I don't want to keep you for too long, but it might be you've still got a few thoughts you wanted to share with us.
Well, I just want to stress that in our part of the world, in Africa, where we find ourselves, it is not actually very easy for women to be involved in the sciences and the engineering, but it's actually worth it if you are someone who is determined, you are someone who is willing to push through, you have the support. And we are breaking barriers as women also in this part of the world, and we want to be given the recognition for the efforts we are making. So, well, it's good for us to share our experiences, and it's going to get others motivated. And I thank you so much for giving me the platform to voice out. Thank you.
Oh, well, thank you so much for sharing with us. It's so valuable, and yeah.
Thanks. Yes, and our student, I think it was Elsie, interviewed you. She really found you fascinating to interview. She really loved that. Thank you, Charity.
Yes, I really enjoyed that interview process, really.
It was lovely. It was nice.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
So, Belen, should we go to the questions in the chat again?
Sure. Let me see. Gil Matheson asked, how did you identify who to interview? Are you looking for more names? where will the interviews will be posted? I guess that will be in INWES, but we are still, and finishing some details of how to do it. Do you have to obtain permission from the individuals to have the interview posted?
Okay. Thank you. Well, that's really helpful. So initially it was Sarah Pears who made the contacts with INWES members and found a dozen people who were willing to be interviewed. More were approached, some declined to take part, were too busy or perhaps didn't really feel ready yet to do the project. So it was really INWES's own operations that brought people to the fore. And it was very nice, for example, that Jung-Sun Kim was willing as president to be interviewed as well, as you were too, Gail, as a former president. What we're looking to do now is hand over the process to INWES to do more autonomously. I think what we talked to Sarah and Jung-Sun about is whether within each of the INWES regions there might be members willing to interview each other. That's the idea that we have, that actually INWES can manage this on their own. Certainly, I'm willing to be involved and help and support in any way, but I think ultimately INWES can make this tool work for itself. INWES will also decide, I guess, indeed, how to use these materials. Clearly, yes, there will need to be a final stage of permission before they go on the website, but all of the interviewees we've talked to are willing to have these materials published within the INWES domain. It's all been checked, edited, and in order to make sure that there's nothing difficult or embarrassing there. But as we said before, this can still be withdrawn. Does that answer the question? I think we've covered most things there, but there's a lot there for INWES maybe to come to point. So perhaps at some point, Jung-Sun would like to make her views on this known.
We've got another question by Gail. Are you familiar with the Rising to the Top Global Women Engineering Leaders Share Their Journeys to Professional Success? I believe there are 3 volumes now. This effort was conducted by the International Federation of Engineering Education Societies and the Global Engineering Deans Council.
I have come across that book. I was going to ask Gail, was this a secret of your success, or was it having your excellent father who supported you so much in getting to the top? No, it's good. I think what we want to do there is not just have leaders. Leaders are great, and leaders are often interviewed, but well, are we not, Emily, really trying to reach out to those who aren't leaders as well to make sure that they feel they can come into the limelight and be interviewed, even though they didn't get to be a president or a CEO of any sort?
Yeah, and I think that speaks to the other question as well, is this sort of idea, I suppose, of INWES members speaking to each other, hopefully, and interviewing each other, is a sort of a bit more of a grassroots, gentle approach to it, because I think, as we know, and something I was discussing recently, is this kind of idea of the leaky pipeline, and this kind of almost, for some women, this idea of becoming a leader, of accelerating to the top can be the thing that means they don't, I don't know, either feel successful. And that's not to say that all different types of experiences are relevant, but I think what we're hoping with this toolkit is to sort of tell something a bit more professional, a bit more personal about what women have experienced in these fields, but ultimately to take control themselves and to tell the narrative that they want to tell. So that's sort of why we want to hand over the toolkit to all of you, because we'll come at it as historians with our point of view and what we want to know. But ultimately, I think by having ownership of it as INWES members and taking that for yourselves, you then get to tell the story that you feel is meaningful and you want to tell. And that's really what we want to encourage, if possible. And again, why we want your feedback so much with designing it, because we could be getting it terribly wrong or not quite right yet. So yeah, Belen, did you want to say something? Can I see you sort of hovering and or
No, I think it's very important, because we already talked about this in a previous meeting about the importance of not only interviewing leaders, but everyone has a story to tell. So yeah.
definitely.
I guess the reason I'm asking the questions is I'm just trying to catch up on where the project is and the process. I mean, I was interviewed, but it was a very busy day for me, and I set the appointment up. I did the interview, but I didn't have time to delve into the background and so forth and the follow-up. So, I was just wondering, because I know a lot of effort was put into these books. the rising to the top. There again, it's just about engineering. I'm not sure there again, where they got my name and why they contacted me. This is a written history. They give you a format of what to write, and then they work with you on editing it and putting it together. But they were getting recommendations from the engineering councils and so forth to add people. So I was just looking as another idea how we can reach out to get more names, contact more people, and potentially get more funding from other organizations that might want to join in the effort. So I'm just doing a little open brainstorming here on other avenues for reaching out, identifying people.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And it's also, it's useful to know what's out there in the landscape as well. And one, to make sure you're not just reinventing the wheel. But also, like you say, to kind of think, where did they get their funding? Who supported them? Because as you know, someone's aesthetic, it's a lot of.
Yeah, though, to follow that up, I think it's just great to say that we had 13 members of INWES who were willing to offer themselves. We're hoping that, as I'm not sure Jungsun may wish to comment on herself, that we want to inspire other members of INWES to do likewise. We've given examples of how it can be done, that it actually is doable. It doesn't take up too much time. It's not too stressful. Hoping that the conference session in September for INWES 19 will be a chance to explore this further, because we know from INWES 18, the session there was a lot of enthusiasm for oral history. Just many people were not familiar with how to do it. But also I would like to emphasize, I spent a lot of time trying to get funding for this sort of thing, and women's history is difficult to get any funding for. That it's the kind of thing we should be able to do without any money. If we make it look like a large amount of funding is required, it might just not happen. So this is the basic frugal economical option, so that anybody can take part. I guess the word democratic. Anyone can write the history now. Anyone can share it within INWES. I said enough. Jung-sun, do you want to comment? I can see you're nodding.
Yes, thank you very much, Graeme. Yeah, I think some of us are not very familiar with this project yet. We have not really had an opportunity to convey the whole picture to our members as a whole. I mean, there have been some intermittent information sent out, and we had discussed this at our board meetings. But as Gail said, we have not really put this picture in perspectives to many of us. So I think this is a good opportunity as a start. And hopefully at INWES 19, I think we can show them even a broader picture. So that's another thing. As far as INWES is concerned, as Graeme has mentioned, what we want to do is collect as many stories as possible. And it's true that in the beginning, when we first started this, there was an intention to obtain funding for a more formal type of project. But thanks to Graeme, we thought, we can still get started with starting with the oral history recording, and with the toolkit available, many stories from INWES members all over the world, whatever their positions are, whatever their roles are, can be recorded. And archiving this will eventually bring out the stories that have not been revealed. So I think in that sense, it's going to be a very meaningful project. So thank you very much, Emily and Graeme, for getting started with this. And today we'd like to hear from Shinlian and some of the participants about this. But I think one thing is that as scientists and engineers, and I think, Graeme, you mentioned this earlier, is that the way we have been trained to think and the way we have been trained to present is, I think, in a very rigid way, where we try to be as objective as we can, so that we don't make mistakes when we say things. And this is, I think, the difficult part about the oral history, that when we say things, we tend to think, am I doing this correctly? It's this objective thinking. So this is one thing that I think, personally, I had difficulty with, and I think some of us scientists may also feel the same. And the other thing is to do something very purpose-driven is, again, something that has been in the back of our minds always. So putting this or softening this process, I think, is going to be also something that we may have to get used to in the recording of our oral histories. And the other thing is also that we are trying to archive this through our website. And this is something that, I'm glad that Sylvia is here with us, and with Belen and Sylvia doing our, who is in charge of the IT team. This is, again, another consideration that we have to think about in INWES as to how we want to compile the data, the stories, and archive that and have them available for future members as well. So I think something that we can discuss also today.
I don't know if you want to present a bit of some questions of the toolkit or something else, or do you prefer to go back to the people you've interviewed and let them share their experiences?
Yeah, I think moving on to sort of the sharing the experiences and sort of any questions that are arising, and I suppose, yeah, that next steps. But yeah, certainly I think the sharing of experiences is great.
I see Shenlian has opened her mic and her camera. Hello, Shenlian.
So I am the one have been interviewed. Yes. As Graeme says, that using English to express my personal experience, that is really hard. Yes, that is not get into the point, because when I say that the letters typing out, that is not so many different discrepancy there. So that is the thing I did not feel good. And also I like that the way you, at the very beginning, you gave me some questionnaires. So I use my native language. I type that, and then I use Google Translation and translate that. So when you interview me, I can easily to speak out. However, during the interview, you come out with other questions, because this one can grab the other questions. During that time, I did well prepared, so that will make my expression is not good. So that is the bad experience. Just like to share. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing that, and that's really helpful to know that when there is a language barrier, that the kind of not perhaps going off on a tangent to new questions that you haven't had time to prepare is not very, very helpful or satisfactory. So yeah, that's noted.
And I should add, thank you, Xinglin. You were the first of our interviewees this year, so our students learned from you in person how challenging it is for someone speaking in their second or third language. So thank you for being so patient and bearing with us while they learned with you.
So is Jung Sun want to reflect a little bit on your experiences with it?
Again, language, I think I agree with Xunlian about the language. I think it's not just the language per se, but the culture that lies behind the language. And this is probably something that Xunlian might agree with me as to how we express ourselves and how we want to convey the message in a way that we felt, or that we have learned as being proper. And so I think that kind of becomes a conflict once in a while when we're trying to answer the question, am I saying this not to offend anyone, or by saying something like this, will this make me look like, I'm trying to look good, which might be a little offending to the listeners or the readers. So that kind of thought comes in the mind. I think, as I'm attending to the interview. So I think this is something more of the Oriental culture. I think, I don't know, Shunlian might agree with me, which is a little different from what we see from the people from the West.
Yeah, I think that's such an important point of that it's not just language, it's the culture behind the language as well. And that is certainly something we've tried to deal with in the FAQ section of the toolkit as it is. But I think certainly if for you who've had the experience, if you wanted to go through that and just add that extra layer of that experience. And I think we are trying to find ways that either people in the same language interview each other, or I think there has been a way that the questions are sent in advance and then the person just chooses to speak in the language that they want to speak in, and then we'll deal with the translation later. So yeah, I think there's certainly negotiations to be made there to make sure, because there's nothing worse than feeling that you can't express yourself clearly.
Yes, but that must be huge work.
Well, the
Yes.
good thing about technology is it's sort of, obviously translations aren't perfect, but again, that's, creating maybe this sort of a bit of a college within INWES of what a team might look like and how we can, I suppose, how you can all do that as a group of lots of international people. But yes, challenges and things to think about. I think Sylvia has her hand up.
Right, coming to technology and translations and the cloud storage. You might have some recommendations on that also, as we came to the Otter first. So which is most efficient as per your experience for storage, as we usually use pro bono options, of course, but it's also a question of organization of the storage. So some clouds might be better than others, and translation tools which would help us, because yes, technology helps a lot, and it changes a lot, which is the best in place and how do you use it. So you might have some hints and recommendations for us.
Well, I think this is something that we're sort of still in the process of talking to INWES about, because ultimately, INWES will be who has to store and find the provision for it. We have been taking advice where we can, but it isn't actually part of Graeme and I's work that we necessarily do this kind of work where we don't necessarily have the best advice, but this is sort of in the next steps of conversations, working out exactly how to do this. And the good thing about Otter was that I think for 30 minutes it's a free service. So yeah, we're definitely trying to find options that of course are free, or at least free for a certain amount, because there isn't any expectation that someone should have to sign up to something or pay in order to work this out. But yeah, so yeah, I think this is part of the ongoing conversations that we've been having with INWES and the team behind who the website, who will be working out how best to store it and what formats for everything to be in.
Yes, just to add to that, there is the question of the recordings. So one thing is a transcript, which is going to be the most public entity. What is a little more challenging, as I think you may be hinting, Sylvie, is the interviews, which can be quite substantial, 250 to 500 megabytes each. And there may not be things that everyone wishes to share, but I know that Jung-Sun Kim has said maybe she would like to have the interview in its original form available long term. And that may be something that we can think through in due course, but there's no great hurry about that, I think, just now. But it is to bear in mind that not everyone would like to have their interviews fully available in their lifetime, maybe only afterwards. That is a delicacy that we can come back to.
Yes, yeah, we're thinking through options for embargoes, because some people might only be happy to share their story as a kind of archived thing, whereas some people might be much more happy for it to be shared and used as a sort of promotional part of INWES as promotional material, etc. So what we're doing is trying to give people different options for what they want to happen to their interview, so that no one feels as if things that they don't want to be shared are going to be shared. So yeah, that's something built in. So we're at the first hour. I don't know sort of Belém, what the exact timing format was.
No, we are within time, so there's no problem. So I expected you to even take more time talking about the kits. So it's okay, don't worry. I was going to say, oh, Nelly has a question. So.
Oh, not a question, but just to share my experiences on the interview and yeah, how I feel about them. Yeah, so I think as Charlene said, different people have different ways of reacting to interviews. Some people are quite good when it comes to oral interviews, others written interviews. So with me, I was okay with the fact that I was given the transcripts earlier. Maybe if I had not been given the transcripts earlier, it would have been quite challenging, especially with some of the questions, because you wouldn't think in that direction. So I believe they took into consideration the fact that you had to be prepared before getting on board, and that was good, because if you are not in the know of some of the questions, you might fumble. And as Jansan says, sometimes you are not too sure whether what you are saying might offend somebody, or someone might be comfortable or uncomfortable with it. So it was good they took care of that by giving the pre-interview questions. And I was okay with the fact that I was prepared, and I was given the opportunity to choose ones that I was not comfortable with, do away with them, and then deal with the ones that I was comfortable with. So it was a good experience, and especially to have your experiences shared with others, because especially in Africa, we don't really encounter some of these things, sharing your story, and you are as someone would say, in your small corner, doing what you do without anybody getting to know. So having the opportunity to share experiences was one of the best things that I encountered, and I think it's something good and must be continued. So we can look at the toolkit and modify it to suit the various regions, and then use it in the near future. Thank you.
Just based on that, another positive experience, and thank you, for again sharing this idea that preparation is really important, and being given time to look at the questions. But I'm just thinking, I wonder if in the toolkit we might want to have some little quotes from the people who've taken part, to just encourage and give you a voice in the toolkit to say this was a really good experience, it was really positive. I thought that could be quite a nice way to start off the toolkit, if the people who've taken part already were happy to share just a short quote in support of doing it, or just talking about that experience. I think that could be a really nice way to kind of make it feel a bit more friendly going forward. Yeah, good.
Yeah, I think that will make people calm down in case they're nervous. And yes, I think it's a good idea. I don't know if Graeme agrees, if it looks like it.
I think, Belén, it will be nice when we get the recording finished to maybe go back over and listen to some of the participants and see if they're willing to share some of the quotations in the revised version that I'll talk it, or maybe send us their thoughts. I mean, there's nothing like having INWES members saying this is good to make it feel like we've done our job, and that it can be useful to other INWES members.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and it's already very rewarding to hear these testimonies, and just to hear that it is, the positive experience that we all want it to be.
I don't know if we've got someone else on the public who's also being interviewed and hasn't.
There's Elise Cummings, one of the students.
Yes, there it is. Yeah. Hello, Elise.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Apologies, I'm at uni today, so I just had to jump on for this. Sarah said the testimonies starting at 10 past.
Yeah, I think there's maybe been some confusion about the timings and
Okay.
but yeah, if you wanted to share at least some of your experience of being the person doing the interviewing, that's the sort of side we haven't heard yet. We've just heard about people who've been interviewed.
I was interviewed.
Oh, you were interviewed, sorry.
Because I'm an engineering student, yeah.
Oh, okay, yeah, no, sorry, I'm getting confused.
It's okay. Did you want me to add anything about that?
Yes.
Yeah, that would
Yeah.
be one.
It was a good experience. I felt very at ease, and I'm glad that this sort of work's being done. So I'm currently studying at INWED in Hereford, which is a brand new university. And I'm currently trying to start some of our first societies, one of which is a Women in STEM society. So it's good to talk about these sorts of issues. I'm increasingly aware of them as I make my start into my engineering career. So I'm glad this sort of thing's being captured now. And I had a good, insightful conversation. So I'm looking forward to seeing what comes of it, really.
Right.
Well, yes, thank you for being so candid, Elise. You told us a lot about yourself and how you were inspired by various things in your family life to take up engineering.
Mm-hmm.
Gail has her hand up. I'm sorry, Graeme. Gail, did you want to?
The question I had is, so this was an oral interview. I received the written transcript via email and was asked to review it. I guess the question is, if I wanted to make changes, you can make changes on the written transcript, but the recording's not going to change. So I've always wondered, how do you do that? Do you go back and then edit the oral or take out things that you don't want in the oral? I mean, can you edit and take out sentences or answers to questions? I didn't understand the process because I didn't know what to do with what you sent me that was written.
Oh, yes. Okay. Well, the only thing we really wanted to have at this stage was an agreed transcript. What we found in the process of the interviews was that many people found the initial interview not quite to their satisfaction. So they didn't want to have that turned into a podcast. But we did have, in the case of Maeve Gallagher, who actually interviewed Jung-Sun Kim, the capacity to edit the MP4 file. So the Teams meeting produced an MP4 video, and that can be edited just to be a sound file. And ultimately, if you wish to do so, you can edit the sound system. But all we really wanted to do was use the video process to generate a text. That's the most fundamental thing, and that can be edited any way you like. It can be changed, it can be erased, or added to. So, yeah, certainly, Gail, feel free to edit the text if you like. And if you want to do a second interview, well, we can do that as well. If you want to go online again and do it once more. But I know are a very experienced interviewee. You're quite a celebrity, aren't you, in the oral history circles, I think. Yeah.
Okay, you lost me there on a couple of your comments.
Okay.
So.
Okay.
You can edit from the written, or you cannot.
Yeah, you can. But the whole point was to edit the transcript, the written version, the text. That's the product we were aiming for initially. That's all that we wanted to supply. If you want to do things with the video and audio files, that can also be done, but that's a secondary matter. It's more expensive. It's more hard work to do, and it does.
Just jump in there. I think the confusion here is perhaps between the difference between what will end up being shared, i.e. published, and what won't. I think, sorry to interrupt you, Graeme, I'm just thinking, because I think with those ones, the original ones that were done, I think the idea was that they would only be working with the written format, not jump in if I've got my wires crossed, Graeme. So in a sense, what happens often with oral histories in the kind of more, I suppose, academic sense is that the oral part isn't necessarily always what's shared. It's often just the transcript. So that's the bit that ends up being edited, and the kind of raw bit might be archived, but perhaps, not to be shared, or at least only looked at by people who have access to the archive. So something, and I think, Gail, you're bringing up a really good point here, because we have been discussing with INWES whether or not there would be keeping the bigger file, i.e. either the video or the oral. And I think you're completely right to say if someone chooses to redact or edit something in the transcript, then that has to match the other file if that is indeed being shared. So I think it's actually a really, really important point to be very clear. And I think normally what happens, it's just that the raw file, i.e. the audio or the video, just doesn't get shared, so the transcript becomes the thing that needs to be edited. But if going forward we might be sharing both, that's a really important thing to make sure that both are being edited, so that of course someone doesn't feel like they've redacted something and then find, wait a minute, it's in the public domain and that was not something that someone wanted shared. That's obviously got ethical issues. So yeah, I think that's a really, really important point to bring up with. But I think with the version that you did, it was very much only the transcript, because that was all that was going to be used, interpreted, and then shared. Does that clear that up?
Yes, it does. And it just was not clear to me.
Yeah.
I have gone through this process with the Society of Women Engineers several years ago, where they put us in a sound booth and they gave us the questions ahead of time, so we could prepare our answers ahead of time. And then they let us listen to the oral recording, and we could go back and ask them to take certain sections out. And those were taken out before they finalized the file, and then they put it into the Society of Women Engineers archives.
Yes, so, yeah, I think that was sounds like probably a bit more of a formal process, because yes, I know that the sway ones that you're referring to.
Okay.
Yeah, but yeah, no,
okay.
I think it's really helpful and vital thing to bring up. So thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
But this is why we mentioned earlier the embargoing of the video recordings. We are expecting people not to want them to be released until a long time later. And we might have a second phase project about videos, but it felt like most people were much more comfortable with having a text, because that's much more easily edited and is much more accessible and requires far less memory space to store and host.
Yeah. I think you just answered Shunlian's questions, because she said, when we archive interviews, what kind of format will be text, article, or other forms? I think you just answered that. Shunlian, it was clear enough for you? Did it answer your questions?
So can you quickly say it again? So how do you archive that? Yes, very in short. Sorry.
Well, I think the first answer is that we're still discussing that with INWES, exactly what that's going to look like. So that's kind of, why perhaps it feels a little unclear. It's because this is something that we're still discussing. But I think certainly the original idea, which is what Graeme and I had been discussing, was that what would be captured would be the transcript, so the written format of it. And then there would need to be some discussion about what happened to the original file. But through speaking to the team at INWES, there was this feeling that actually having either the audio, if that's all there is, or the video could be really important, because as was discussed, the way someone expresses themselves can be more than just their words, it's their expressions, their hand expressions. So there was some sense of, well, can we actually archive a little bit more? So I think, to answer your question, it's not confirmed yet, but there are discussions about how to do that. But also, it's really important to say is that before an interview, everyone should be given exactly the information about what will be stored, and been given the option to say, I only want the transcript, for example, or I'm happy for all of it to be stored. The idea is to give the person being interviewed full control over what happens to the material that's collected, and that at any point they could say, I now want that deleted, erased, edited. So it's kind of just making sure that that control sits with the person who's being interviewed, and that they're really clear that they have full control over that. So that's, again, something we're going to build into the consent forms that we provide as part of the toolkit. Because you want to feel like you have control over the things that you say and put into the public domain, because that's incredibly important.
you as already checked in the chat box that with Taiwan tourists, we already have a storytelling. Every month we have one story written by women in scientists, and we published monthly. There is a story. And then we have 100 months story, then we pick up 36. We choose 36 stories, we publish the book. And then that books is very, very good. And then that is very useful to be a role model. We do not need to go far away to see the Poland. Madame Curie's story, on our neighborhood, we have our own stories. That is one thing we already done. And then we also we choose 5 stories as a pilot. We audio recording that. And then each person, we're still there, so we can record our sound and then telling our story. This is one thing. And for Jiali Wu, she already passed away. We asked her husband to telling her story. So we already done 5 voice record for that. So this is what we already done currently. Just share with you.
Oh, brilliant. Yeah, and maybe there's a way in which on the INWES website, there could be a way of collating similar projects together, or kind of creating a space that, that knowing that that's the kind of place that exists, if that was what you wanted to do and share your story in that way. I think part of having these conversations is it's sometimes a way for people to just realize that there's other work going on, and that sometimes we just need a place to share the different spaces. Would you think that would be a good idea? Just thinking, make sure that everything's joined up. I only mean putting a link, say, to this, in the toolkit, or.
Actually, that's something that I wanted to ask you, Emily, and maybe Graeme, is because the interviews that have been conducted come in it's a simple, but it's a common format that has been asked. And this is why we call it a toolkit. Now, if there are other materials like what Twist in Taiwan has been doing with their history, and I know like Gail has mentioned about the Sui, and in Korea also there are some organizations that publish stories of women, but the format are all different. Is it a good idea to put them together? Or is there a way we can compile them in a way where the stories can add and show or have impact in an efficient way?
Well, I think certainly when we have the useful links section of the toolkit, where we've already shared to a few that we were aware of, but some of these that you're telling us are new to us today. But I would certainly say one simple way would be to link to it in the toolkit, for sure. And then I guess, one thing is making sure that you aren't contradicting, I suppose, advice coming from other places, so it'd be worth looking at. But yeah, I would say you want stuff to speak to each other and for people to know other options. And obviously, if there are forums already set up that someone might want to share their interview with, then by all means. I mean, Graeme, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yes, I guess we don't want to tread on the territory of other organizations which have their own formats. What we can do, as Emily says, is acknowledge them as variant ways of producing histories in the final section of the toolkit. But what we want to do is not prescribe to organizations how to run their particular publications, just making it possible to generate the stories in the first place is our basic goal. And once the stories are generated, they can be put into all sorts of formats as needed. But if it helps, then certainly we can, in the appendix, Emily, add in more examples of the kinds of things that are done with oral history, so it can be seen how productive it is, not just an abstract academic exercise, but something that really serves a useful policy purpose and reaches out to very wide audiences with important effects.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that kind of links into having the people's voices who've already been interviewed with the quotations. I think anything that means people can see that this is, you know, something that they can do and isn't, as like Graeme says, just purely academic or anything, I think is really good to encourage people. So yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So basically, if you want to have your organization and its oral history work or otherwise mentioned in the toolkit, just let us know, put it in the chat, or contact Sarah, possibly, Sarah Peers.
Yeah, definitely. I think Nelly has a hand up, and then Gail.
Yes, just a quick suggestion that I would like to make. You know, because of our differences in the regions, you know, in Africa, we speak slowly, we take our time when we are speaking, but when you go to other places, you speak hurriedly, and it sounds different. So one experience that I had with my interviewer was that I really had to strain and be very, very what do you call, attentive, because before I could hear some of the words, you know, because it was spoken in a very hurried manner. I think the student Jessica who interviewed me, she spoke, you know, quite hurriedly, and so some of the words I missed them. So I was wondering if you could train people to interview people from different regions. So like you have somebody from Africa, you could train somebody with an African descent. I think that would make the interview more smooth, more understandable than somebody who speaks, you know, differently from us. Even though it's the same language, you know, the fluency is quite different. So it made some of the questions quite difficult to understand. I had to, you know, keep on asking, can you repeat yourself? Can you repeat yourself, before I could get some of the questions. So that's a suggestion.
Okay. Well, thanks, Tony. Well, that's why we had the questions written down and sent out in advance. But we appreciate it's the follow-up questions which weren't so easy. But on the bigger point, absolutely, what we have suggested is that one way that INWES could proceed in future is have these interviews done within the 4 INWES regions. So the African network perhaps might have interviewees from their own culture, their own continent, so that the cultural assumptions and languages and other conventions are shared. What was obvious, as you said, was it was a little uncomfortable talking across cultures, even if it was educational. So maybe it is best done, as you say, with people who are much more familiar with particular cultures of orality and certain speeds of conversation. Absolutely, I agree with you.
Gail also wanted to speak.
Yeah, I'm just thinking with my INWES hat on here going forward with this project and effort. I mean, obviously, I think this needs to be an ongoing program of INWES, and making sure we have someone on the board that is in charge of this process going forward. I think that's very important. Secondly, I think we need to do some brainstorming and make sure we come up with a comprehensive list of our INWES pioneers or ICWES pioneers, and try to get these interviews conducted as soon as possible for some of the early women that were involved with INWES and ICWES before it's too late. I think that would be very important on going forward. And then the other thing is, I know that when you go out and do searches on the internet, there's certain things that you can do to make your information, your website, your your location of your data more searchable or more easily defined when you do searches. And I think that's something what we need to think about in the future, that when people do searches about women in STEM, that they quickly find the INWES website with our information. So those are just some thoughts that came to mind while we were having this discussion for INWES, for our notes going forward.
Thank you, Gail. Yes, the SEO is what you're talking about the search on the internet. And yes, we've got people here from both the IT team and the communications committee. So yeah, we'll take notes on that. Yes, thank you. I don't know if there's any more questions, or shall we talk, though we've already been doing it, about the next steps on this.
Can I just mention one thing maybe then? Clearly, what we've produced is a draft toolkit, which we hope that people can comment on, help us improve, so that when the INWES conference happens in September, people will have looked at it and maybe even tried using it. That's what we hope, isn't it, Emily, actually, that they'll bring their experiences of trying it out to INWES 19, and then on that basis say maybe ways in which the toolkit could be improved, or ways that might be promoted. That was one thought that I think Emily and I wanted to put to you all.
Thank you then. If there is no more questions, it will be great to see at INWES how the project has advanced and what feedback people can give, because you know, we are 20 people here right now, but people will see the recording later, and we'll talk about it on the website and to our members. So we will spread the word about the kit. So I hope you'll get lots of feedback about it, and hopefully people will start interviewing other members themselves and testing it, because I guess you want people also to test it themselves and see how the interviewer and the interview feel about it, don't you?
Yes, and let me say, I'll put my email address into the chat. I'm willing to offer advice or help if people want that. I've experienced 2 years of this now. I don't presume to be any kind of authority on oral history, but I've known what it's like for people to get through it all. I mean, Jung-sun, it was great. I know there were some challenging moments, but if you wish to have advice, please ask ahead, ask away. Yeah.
Thank you. Graeme, would you like to present, for example, a date that you want to get the feedback by, so that it will help with your preparation for INWES 19? And also, as far as having contacts with you, is there, for example, a day or a time, or something like that, that will, that you would like to let the people know?
Well, those are very important questions. I'm not sure I have answers for them right now, Jung-sun, but Emily, what about maybe perhaps having a date of early August for feedback, do you think?
Yeah, I think that sounds good. Early August. Yeah.
But for other questions, well, if people have ambitions to undertake some oral history work using our toolkit, please do it as soon as you can. Just whenever you feel like doing it, don't hesitate to email me. I will get back to you when I'm available and encourage you. It's one of the most fun part of the job, so it doesn't feel like a problem at all. I may well email you at a strange time of the day or night, but I will get back to you and I'll give you the answer that hopefully that you want. Yeah, and Emily may well be able to help as well, depending upon what your work situation is. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Also happy to help.
Thank you. So thank you, Graeme. Thank you, Emily, for all your work on the toolkit. And thank you, Sarah, who isn't here. And thank you, of course, all the interviews who've shared their experiences. Thank you so much also to the people who've been listening to the webinar and collaborating and making questions. So thank you for everything. I hope you, Anya has a question. Was just in time.
Yes, my question is that when we have this kind of oral stories, so should we prepare in different kind of language for different people that they can get to know the story or history? Yeah, because I think, as we mentioned earlier, language is the major barrier. So if we have different version with different languages, I think more people will understand the story easier. with their heart. Yeah.
Definitely. And I think also if you feel that the toolkit, you understand it enough in English, but then want to sort of translate it yourself and go off and do an interview in your language with someone, any language you choose, it doesn't have to be your native language, that's completely fine. That's kind of the idea, is the toolkit is yours to interpret as you please. It isn't a fixed final document. And then if you want to send back to INWES an interview in any language, that's completely fine. You don't even have to worry about translating it into English. The main thing is that the interviews get captured in whatever language people feel comfortable using. And then the idea is, yes, moving forward, we do want to translate the toolkit. Bear with us with doing it in English to begin with, because obviously Graeme and I are native English speakers, but that is not fixed. So yeah, I think that's a really important final thing to say. Just go for it in whatever language you want. Don't worry about the translation even, just, get interviewing in whatever language you want to do it in.
Okay. And maybe also email you the toolkit in whatever language. So you already have an archive of the toolkit in different languages.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. So thank you very much. Yeah.
Oh, sorry, just one thing, because I know Twist is maybe very much interested in this project also. I mean, even though this is an INWES collaborative work, but I think the Taiwanese group themselves may want to start the translation even before INWES does it. So if Dr. Lin would like to contact Professor Gooday, Graeme, about the Taiwanese version, I think that might be something that we could start in parallel. So,
well, all I would say is that we don't want to control this process. So if you wish to start translating it now, fine. But what we have yet only got is a first draft of the toolkit. You might want to wait until we've had a more refined version that comes out of the INWES 19 gathering in September. But, don't hold back. We're not in charge. You do with the document you like, translate it any way you want if it's useful for you. Yeah.
Again, Julian is giving a thumbs up. Great. Okay, thank you very much for joining us, and thank you so much for all your experiences and questions. And I hope we'll see each other in the next webinar and in INWES, of course.